Hello, and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this section, we're going over workflow in Photoshop. And in this video, we'll be covering smart objects, channels, and masks. These can get a little complicated, especially when you're just starting out with Photoshop. But they can be very useful when handled correctly. So please, pay close attention. Smart objects in Photoshop can be very helpful. They essentially enhance your ability to edit layers. Converting one of your layers into a smart object basically puts it inside of a mini Photoshop document within your existing Photoshop document. That may not sound very useful, but I'll show you why it's an incredibly powerful feature and you should give it a try. To start off, I have an image here with a lot of hot air balloons on it. And in this layer on top, I have a balloon separated from the background. And I can move and edit this independent of everything else on my layer. This is going to help me show you the difference between a smart object and a regular layer. So the first thing I'll do is make sure I have my balloon layer selected. Then I'll choose my Move tool. Then I'll press and hold the Alt key on my keyboard and click and drag my balloon to duplicate it over here to the right. Then I'll right-click my original balloon layer and click Convert to Smart Object. Okay, I've converted my balloon on the left into a smart object, but it doesn't seem to look any different. That's because it really isn't different. Smart objects in themselves aren't special in any way. It's what you can do with them later that makes them special. I'll show you what I mean by editing both my smart object and my regular layer at the same time. I'm going to hold my Shift key to select both these layers. Then I'll hit Ctrl T to go into Free Transform. I'll go up to the top in the tool options, lock the width and height. Then I'll take these down to 10% of their current size and click the check mark to commit my free transform. Again, the two layers look exactly the same. They're both a lot smaller, but I don't see any difference between the two. While I still have both layers selected, I'll hit Ctrl T again, lock the width and height. Then I'll bring these up to 1000% of their current size. This will bring them back to their original size before I ever shrunk them. Well, there's a difference. Just look at the quality of my regular layer on the right. All the edges have become horribly pixelated. This is because when you shrink a regular layer, the layer ends up using less pixels. Then Photoshop deletes the pixels that aren't being used. So, if you try to bring it back, Photoshop has to guess what it looked like in the first place, but most of the original quality is lost. Now look here at my smart object on the left. It looks like we never resized it at all. That's because, technically, we didn't. Remember when I said that a smart object is a mini document within your document? I can open my smart object by double-clicking its layer. Then I'll hit OK in this dialog box. Now I am inside of my smart object, and here you can see that it's completely isolated from the rest of my image and retains 100% of its quality. When you convert a layer to a smart object, it creates an entirely separate document just for the contents of that layer. I'll just close this and go back to my document. So now you understand that a smart object is basically just a link to a separate document, and I can resize it as much as I want without losing its original quality. Another benefit to using smart objects is when using filters. First, I'm just going to select my regular layer. Then I'll go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I'm going to add a really strong blur around 30%. and click OK to apply it. Okay, so this is basically just blurred my regular balloon, and it's really kind of overkill. If I look in my Layers panel, there are no extra options or way to reduce this besides undoing it completely from the Layers panel. I'm going to go ahead and keep this. In fact, I'll repeat those same steps and apply the exact same blur to my Smart Object balloon. I'll select my Smart Object in the Layers panel. Then I'll go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I'll keep it around 30% and click OK. On the canvas, both blurs look identical, but pay attention to the Layers panel. You can see my Gaussian blur is now an option below my Smart Object. I can hide my Gaussian blur completely just by clicking the eyeball icon beside it. And if I double-click my Gaussian blur, you can see the same dialog box appears with the slider to control the blur. From here, I can either increase or decrease my blur and click OK. So you can see that with Smart Objects, filters aren't permanent at all. What a contrast to my regular layer, where I can't even hide my filter, and nonetheless change its values after the fact. Another great feature of using Smart Objects in conjunction with filters is the ability to mask the filters. If I want to hide a specific area of my blur, I can just click the Smart Filter Mask and use a black brush to paint in the areas that I don't want to be blurred. I don't want to blur my balloon after all, so I'm just going to drag the Gaussian blur in my Layers panel down to the trash icon. I think I'm going to delete my regular layer balloon as well. Now my Smart Object is back to normal. I think I'm going to duplicate it a few times across my canvas. Then I'll resize these one by one so they look more like they belong. Now remember, all of these are linking back to the same balloon. I'm going to enter my Smart Object again by double-clicking its thumbnail in the Layers panel. Then I'll pay a little more attention to this dialog box. It says, after editing the contents, choose File, Save to commit the changes. Those changes will be reflected upon returning to your PSD. So this basically means that I'll have to save my Smart Object itself before any changes will link back to my original document. I'll click Don't Show Again and choose OK. Here we see my balloon again, isolated in this document on its own layer. I'm going to make a new layer above my balloon. Then I'll use my brush tool to make a question mark in the center of it. Now I'll save this by hitting Ctrl-S on my keyboard. Then I can close this by hitting Ctrl-W on the keyboard. Now I'm back to my original document. And look, my question mark is on all of my linked Smart Objects. This is because all of these are linking back to the exact same balloon with my question mark on it. This can be incredibly useful if you need to apply the same changes in several objects. And the best part about it is I can always go back to my Smart Object and change it again. If you've ever painted or even used crayons before, you'll know that you don't always start out with the exact colors you want. In fact, you may only have access to a few different colors. What you learn very early on is that sometimes you have to mix certain colors together to get the exact color you want. When you see detailed photographs on the computer, you may see anywhere from hundreds to thousands or even millions of different colors. What if I told you that all those images were only made up of 3 different colors? That's right, images on the computer are made up of only 3 different colors. It's when you combine these colors in complex ways that you get all these fantastic results. The three core colors we see on screen are red, green, and blue. They're commonly abbreviated to RGB. And in Photoshop, you can access these colors individually. They're called channels. I'll go to the Channels panel now by clicking its tab right beside the Layers panel tab. Right now, we see 4 different channels. There's blue, green, red, and then all of them combined in RGB. I'm going to hide the red channel by clicking its eyeball icon. Now we're seeing the image without any red whatsoever. Instead, we're just seeing a combination of green and blue. Now, if I hide the green channel, my image turns black and white. But how does that work if we're supposed to be seeing only blues? That's because without any other colors at our disposal, the channel is showing me the values of the blues. White represents the purest form of blue, where blue is most present, while black represents the absence of blue entirely. So since this blue channel is mostly white, we can assume that most of the image is blue. I'll show the green channel and hide the blue channel. Now we're getting a slightly darker background, and some of these balloons have darkened up as well. This is because there's less green than there is blue in this image overall. Now I'll show the red channel and hide the green channel. You may notice that in some areas, the blacks and whites don't change, no matter what channel we're on. This is because pure white contains the maximum values of all 3 colors at the same time, while pure black is the absence of all 3 colors. Anyways, now that I'm on the red channel, some interesting things are happening. The sky has darkened considerably, and now I'm seeing a lot of variation in the checker patterns on the balloons. So as you can see, channels are pretty neat, but it may be hard to see the practical applications of channels. I'll be able to get more in depth with channels once we start using them in conjunction with more photography-based projects. Channels are absolutely essential for somebody working with photographs. We'll be getting into a section on photography very soon. Finally, we're getting to one of my favorite features in Photoshop, masks. We've already touched on masks a few times in this course, but now I have a chance to show you everything I really want you to know. Now when I select a layer and click the Layer Mask button at the bottom of the screen, it adds a layer mask to the right of my layer's thumbnail. In itself, this doesn't really seem to do anything, but what it does allow you to do is use black, white, and shades of gray to either hide or show parts of that layer. So I can get a black brush and just paint away any part of my layer. So far, this is performing the exact same function as the eraser tool, only with one extra step that I didn't even need to do. What sets masks apart is the ability to switch the color of my brush back to white and paint any part of the layer back in. When it comes to masks, white reveals and black conceals. This is the main reason for using layer masks, this ability to go back and make adjustments anytime you want. Another beauty part of masks is one I just glossed over, the fact that I used a brush to hide or show my layer. This means I can go into my brush panel and choose any preset I want to make the most intricate adjustments. So we know that pure black and white can either hide or show a layer, but what about the shades of gray in between? I'm going to go to my Tools panel and get my Gradient tool. We can see in the tool options on top, my gradient is going from white to black. I'm just going to click and drag in my balloon's mask from top to bottom. That's right. With layer masks, I can fade my layers from any angle using any shades of gray. What if I already have my mask set, but I want to flip it? Well, it's just going from white to black. So all I would have to do is invert the colors of the mask. To do that, I can hit Control-I on my keyboard, and the fade flips upside down. And another thing, right now the position of my mask is locked to the position of my balloon. So when I select my layer and use my Move tool, the fade and the balloon are linked together. If I want to move either my mask or my layer independently of each other, all I have to do is click this little chain link between them. Then I can move either one and the other will stay perfectly still. What if I've spent all day perfecting my mask and I want to apply it to another layer? Masks can be copied just like layers can. I can press and hold the Alt key, then click and drag my layer mask to any other layer to duplicate it. I can even step inside my masks if I want to. All I have to do is press and hold the Alt key, then click directly on my mask. Now I'm inside my mask, and I can see exactly where the gradient begins and ends. To get back to my layer, I can just click the layer's thumbnail. Finally, masks have their own options, just like layers do. If I select my mask, then click the Properties button near the top here, I have this density option. This controls the transparency of my mask. 0% means the mask is having no effect on my layer. 100% means the mask is having full effect on my layer. And I also have this feather option that will blur any edges of the mask, resulting in even more fading. Masks are definitely a useful feature for enhancing selections and giving us room to play with our layers. Okay, with smart objects, we went over how they can preserve the size of any layer, edit any filters after they've been applied, and how they link out to your layer on a separate document that you can change at any time. We also went over channels and how they split up the 3 colors that make up the images on your screen. And we went over layer masks, how they can show or hide any portion of your layer and be edited or copied after the fact. That will do it for the workflow section. I will go over photo correction in the next section.